British Rail Class 156. The British Rail Class 156 Super Sprinter is a diesel multiple-unit passenger train. A total of 114 sets were built between 1987 and 1989 for British Rail by Metro-Cammell's Washwood Heath works. They were built to replace elderly first-generation DMU and locomotive-hauled passenger trains. Background: by the beginning of the 1980s, British Rail BR operated a large fleet of first-generation DMU, which had been constructed in prior decades to various designs. While formulating its long-term strategy for this sector of its operations, British Rail planners recognized that there would be considerable costs incurred by undertaking refurbishment programs necessary for the continued use of these aging multiple units, particularly due to the necessity of handling and removing hazardous materials such as asbestos. In light of the high costs involved in retention, planners examined the prospects for the development and introduction of a new generation of DMU to succeed the first generation. In the concept stage, two separate approaches were devised, one involving a so-called railbus that prioritized the minimization of both initial procurement and ongoing maintenance and operational costs, while the second was a more substantial DMU that could deliver superior performance than the existing fleet, particularly when it came to long-distance services. The initial specification developed for the latter concept was relatively ambitious, calling for a maximum speed of 90 mph 140 km/h acceleration comparable to contemporary EMUs, the ability to couple/work in multiple with existing EMUs, facilitate through access for passengers, feature pressure ventilation, the ability. This specification led to the experimental British Rail Class 210 DMU. However, it was found that relatively expensive equipment was needed for the performance specified, particularly to provide sufficient speed, acceleration, and through passenger access maintainability also suffered due to space limitations. It was recognized that a production model assembled from proven components would possess greater reliability and lower maintenance costs. An availability rate of 85% was forecast. By 1983, experiences with the Class 210 had influenced BR planners to favor procuring a new generation of DMU, but to also adopt a new specification that were somewhat less demanding than before. Specifically, it was decided to drop the top speed from 90 to 75 mph 145 to 121 km/h as testing had revealed the higher rate, to deliver no perceivable improvement in journey times due to the typically short spacing of the stations the type was intended to serve. Furthermore, it was determined that a propulsion system delivering 7 HP per ton would deliver sufficient acceleration. The requests for compatibility with other rolling stock were eliminated, although auto-coupling and auto-connecting functionality was added. In addition to a good ride quality, the specification included a sound level of 90 dB when, at full speed, an operational range of 1,000 miles 1,600 km, and an interval between major overhauls of 5 years or 350,000 miles 560,000 km. While the prior generation of DMU typically used a pair of engines for each power car, it was also intended that the DMU could be assembled akin to building blocks, comprising between 2 and 4 cars that could be outfitted with various passenger amenities such as toilets and luggage spaces. Initially formalized as a business specification, these requirements were transferred into a relatively broad technical specification that avoided any specifics other than those that were deemed essential for compatibility purposes. Thereafter, it was issued to various rolling stock manufacturers for a competitive tender. Under this process, responding manufacturers submitted bids to construct an initial series of 3-car demonstration units. A constrained timetable of only 18 months between the date of order to delivery of these prototypes was also specified. This has been attributed as having compelled manufacturers to lean towards existing industrial practices for their submissions. The bid submitted by British Rail Engineering Limited (BREL) was heavily based on its successful Class 455 DMU, sharing its body and the majority of its running gear, albeit equipped with two different power trains. The railway engineering company Metro-Cammell also offered its own design that employed riveted aluminium construction. This approach produced a meaningful weight reduction over conventional methods. BR officials opted to proceed with a pair of prototypes from both Brell and Metro-Cammell, resulting in the Class 150 and Class 151 respectively. Between 1984 and 1985, these prototype units were delivered to BR and commenced their trial service period. Both the Class 150 and 151 units were subject to extensive evaluations with the aim of a larger production order being forthcoming for the more successful of the two types. Testing revealed that the Class 150 had exception ride quality, as well as fully satisfying the 50% engine outperformance requirements. It was also determined that both types achieved adequate noise levels for its intended service sector, but were also noted that this area would likely pose an issue if they were ever directed towards the higher end of the market. Early concerns regarding the body bending frequency of the Class 151 did not prove to have major substance to them. Ultimately, the Class 150 prototypes proved to be more reliable, and an order for 52 car units was accordingly issued to Brell. Even prior to the introduction of the Class 150, there was a recognized interest within BR at potentially tasking the new DMU with the replacement of other services, targeting not only first-generation DMU but a number of locomotive-hauled trains as well. It had also been observed that, in its current configuration, the Class 150 would be unsatisfactory in some criteria for more upmarket services, but that some thought into developing derivatives of the type to handle such services had been made. An early solution for reducing internal noise levels was the discarding of openable windows in favor of fully sealed units, along with the relocation of the external doors into vestibules located at either ends of each coach. Furthermore, the coaches could be stretched, providing more internal volume and thus enabling the somewhat cramped 2-by-3 seating arrangement of the Class 150 to be substituted with a more roomy 2-by-2 counterpart. These changes could be implemented without impacting much of the benefits of adopting the existing design. It was identified that this would result in a weight increase and thus a decreased power-to-weight ratio. Studies determined that the performance of the proposed DMU showed only minor change, and would achieve similar journey times across the intended cross-country routes to the Class 150. It was also found that, while there was a slight increase in fuel consumption due to the modifications, the envisioned DMU possessed significantly less fuel consumption than locomotive-hauled trains, as well as reduced maintenance costs. Accordingly, it was decided to proceed with developing a detailed specification and issuing it to industry. Amongst the requirements listed in the issued specification was the explicit statement of the acceptability of the proven powertrains of both the Class 150 and Class 151 for this requirement. During late 1985, BR placed an order with Metro-Cammell to supply 114 two-carriage units. Description: the design of the Class 156 was relatively conservative in comparison to Metro-Cammell's earlier Class 151 design. Specific changes include the bodyshell being primarily composed of steel instead of aluminium. The deliberate decision was made to model the cab design on the earlier Class 150 was allegedly taken to ease union acceptance. Each coach is powered, being outfitted with a single 6-cylinder Cummins and 855 R5 diesel engine coupled to Voith T211 or hydraulic automatic transmissions and Gemander final drive units. The Class 156 can achieve a top speed of 75 mph 121 km/h. Construction of the welded bodyshells was subcontracted out with Procker Engineering, Wakefield completing 118 W.H. Davis 60 and Standard Wagon 50. Aston Martin Tickford were awarded the interior fit-out contract. The units were all built as two-car sets, numbered 156,401-514. Each unit was formed of two driving motors, one of which contained a toilet. Individual carriages numbered as follows: 52,401-52,514 57,401-57,514 driving motor standard DMs, containing an area for storing wheelchairs, bicycles, bulky luggage, etc. Unlike the Class 150 units, the 156 have a single-leaf sliding door at either end of each coach. This reflected the expected longer journeys with fewer stops that the Class 156 was supposed to operate. As with the Class 150, all the doors are operable by passengers when released by the guard using one of two passenger door control panels. They are energized using a carriage key to turn a rotary switch situated on the cab bulkhead. Units operated by Abellio ScotRail have additionally been fitted with door control panels. Operations: British Rail. On 10 November 1987, 156,401 conducted its first test run from Washwood Heath to Banbury. Between January and July 1988, 156,401-156,429 were delivered to Crown Point TMD, entering service on 16 May 1988 on new services from East Anglia to northwest England, as well as existing services from Norwich and Cambrai. They also operated boat trains from Harwich to Blackpool and later Liverpool. The remaining 85 were delivered to Heaton, Neville Hill, Haymarket and Inverness. With the Class 155 units withdrawn due to faulty door mechanisms, 25 were transferred to Cardiff from December 1988, with the last remaining until November 1989. In this guise, they operated services as far south as Portsmouth. In May 1991, 6 were transferred from Crown Point to Derby Etches Park. On 15 June 1989, 156,502 was sent to the Netherlands as part of the Dutch Railways' 150th celebrations. It returned on 10 July. On 21 October 1993, 156,405 became the first sprinter to accrue 1 million miles, whilst working the 10 Great Yarmouth to Norwich service. The first 100 were painted in provincial sectors, livery of blue and beige with light blue stripe. 20 units, 156,401-419/422 based at Tyseley Depot, were later repainted into Regional Railways Express livery after the rebranding of Provincial. The last 14 units were operated by Strathclyde Pte. And carried an orange and black livery. Following the delivery of the Class 158s in the early 1990s, the 156 began to be cascaded to less important services. In the early 1990s, British Rail was looking to save costs on rural routes and decided that operating two-car trains was too expensive. The company planned to convert a number of Class 156 units into single-car vehicles, named as Class 152. In the event, the decision was taken to do this, with the Class 155 instead, forming the Class 153 fleet. Post-privatisation. As part of the privatisation of British Rail, the Class 156 fleet was sold, with Angel Trains taking ownership of 76 and Porterbrook 38. These were leased to several train operating companies. Scotland. At privatisation, the Scottish fleet passed to the National Express-owned ScotRail franchise, which used them until 2004, when the franchise was taken over by First ScotRail. All passed to Abellio ScotRail with the franchise in 2015. They operate both on short-distance commuter routes and on services of up to 5.5 hours, such as Glasgow to Fort William and Malade. Units 156,500-514 were operated by Strathclyde Partnership for Transport and originally wore its orange and black livery. This was replaced with a carmine and cream livery in 1997 that was also applied to another 14. All have since been repainted into ScotRail's standard Saltire livery. Despite their past liveries, the former SBT units were not confined to any specific route and thus worked in tandem with the rest of the 156 fleet on other routes. Generally, units work interchangeably on local and long-distance workings. However, only the 15 retrofitted units can operate on the West Highland Line. In September 2008, Transport Scotland announced that all ScotRail trains, including those of Strathclyde Partnership for Transport, would be repainted in a new livery of blue with white Saltire markings on the carriage ends. The first 156 was repainted in this livery by Railcare Springburn in February 2009. In December 2014, 156,478 was written off by Angel Trains and sold to Brodie Leasing after being damaged by floodwaters on the Glasgow South Western Line. Brodie Leasing repaired the unit and it returned to service with Abellio ScotRail in October 2016. In 2016, a program to fit the units with disabled toilets and effluent tanks began. Conversion of the fleet should be completed by December 2017. In late 2018, 5 units transferred to a River Rail North after the Class 385s began to enter service. East Anglia. Having originally been based in the East Anglia region, but later transferred away, in early 2005 they returned when one received 9 from Central Trains in exchange for a similar number of Class 150s. The units are used on the following local services: Bittern Line Norwich to Sheringham via Cromer, Wherry Lines Norwich to Great Yarmouth/Lowestoft, East Suffolk Line Ipswich to Lowestoft/Felixstowe, Sudbury Branch Line Markstay to Sudbury, as well as the longer distance services between Ipswich to Cambridge/Peterborough. All 9 passed to Abellio Greater Anglia when it took over the Greater Anglia franchise in February 2012. Despite being overhauled by Railcare Wolverton in 2012/13, including work to make them comply with disability legislation, all were replaced by Class 755s, with the last day of service being 29 January 2020. These then moved to East Midlands Railway, where they were renumbered into the /9 series. Northern England. Midlands. In 1997, Central Trains inherited 20 units from regional railways for use mainly on medium-distance services such as Birmingham to Nottingham via Derby or Leicester, Birmingham to Hereford, Birmingham to Shrewsbury and the Cambrian Line, Nottingham to Skegness or Lincoln. In an attempt at fleet standardization, preparations were made during 2003 to exchange all 20 Class 156 for an equal number of ScotRail Class 158s, with 156,402 partially repainted in ScotRail colours in readiness when overhauled at Wabtec. The transfer did not proceed after the Scottish government refused to sanction the move, and the rest of the fleet were reliveried into Central Trains livery between 2003 and 2005. 9 units were transferred to 1 during early 2005 in exchange for a similar number of Class 150s. At the end of the Central Trains franchise, the remaining 11 units were transferred to East Midlands Trains, who repainted the fleet during 2008 and then carried out a refurbishment program from autumn 2010 onwards. The refurbishment, carried out at Neville Hill Depot, included interior refurbishment work, improvements to driving cabs, and installation of CCTV. These trains are now used on slower medium-distance services such as Nottingham/Derby to Matlock, Nottingham to Skegness, Leicester to Lincoln, and Nottingham to Worksop. In May 2011, 4 additional units were transferred from Northern Rail to allow Nottingham to Liverpool services to be strengthened. Beginning in late 2019, the 9 Class 156 transferred to Greater Anglia in 2005 passed to East Midlands Railway. Because they had a different public address and passenger information system to EMR existing Class 156 fleet, they were renumbered as 156/9s. Fleet details. Accidents and incidents. On 31 January 1995, Unit 156,490 was derailed by a landslide and was subsequently run into by another train traveling in the opposite direction. The train conductor of 156,490, Stuart Wilson, was killed. On 6 June 2010, Unit 156,499 struck a rockfall, was derailed and caught fire near Falls of Cruachan. 8 people were injured. On 17 August 2010, Unit 156,417 was involved in a collision with a slurry tanker at a user-operated level crossing in Suffolk. 21 people were injured, one of them seriously. On 21 December 2014, Unit 156,478 hit flood waters near Mauchline between Kilmarnock and Auchinleck. The unit was repaired and refurbished at Kilmarnock's Brodie Works and returned to service in October 2016. On 22 January 2018, Unit 156,458 struck a landslip and was derailed between Arisaig and Glenfinnan. There were no injuries. On 7 January 2019, Unit 156,479 collided with a taxi between Newcastle and Carlisle. There were no injuries. Models. Models. The Class 156 was modeled by Lima in O gauge with 16 different variants available. The Lima model was relaunched in 2006 by Hornby Railways. In 2017, Real Track Models released their model of the Class 156 in Regional Railways Provincial, First ScotRail and East Midlands Trains liveries.